Hi, I'm Naomi Murphy, and this is the Locked Up Living podcast, where we talk with a wide range of people about harsh aspects of institutional life.
We also explore some of the ways to overcome them and to grow and develop. I'm David Jones. So join us every Wednesday morning, 6 o'clock UK time, for a fresh podcast.
So today's guest is Sybil Taunton, and I met Sybil at a workshop that we were jointly involved in running for National Association of Women in Construction back in November 2023. And I thought, when talking to Sybil, I just thought Sybil's got such a powerful story that I think she'd be a really interesting guest to get on and hear what she had to say. So really pleased that you could join us today, Sybil. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So, Sybil, how did you end up working in an equality, diversity and inclusion role at the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors? Do you have a background as a surveyor?
I do not actually. So my background, and which is why Naomi, invited me onto this podcast, is with the United States Air Force. I served 12 years as a public affairs officer, doing public relations and community engagement for the U.S. Air Force, and that brought me out to the United Kingdom. And then I separated from the service, and the RICS picked me up from there. So I started in a global communications role, but then the organization, they developed a head of diversity, equity, and inclusion role, and that's something I've done for many years, side of desk, like many people in this line of work have done. And when I saw that role advertised, I decided to throw my hat in the ring for it, because when I was doing communications, there were things that filled my cup up and there were things that drained me, and some of this more like corporate communication stuff was quite draining, in getting to do campaigns around diversity and inclusion and other things was what was filling my cup up. So I decided I should really focus on a career path that's going to fill my cup up every day, even though it's hard work and it's challenging. And so that's how I ended up in this space.
So how does it do that? How does it fill your cup up, to use your phrase? And so why does the work matter to you in this way?
I think because of my personal experiences, I think a lot of that is really important in this line of work, to have personal lived experience that kind of fuels you, but it's not an absolute requirement, but I think it is valuable. So for me, having served in the U.S. military under the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, when I am part of the LGBTQ community, and having to experience what that's like, of being told, it can't be who I am or my career's over. What fuels me to do this work is to try and make sure no one else ever has to experience what that feels like, because it isn't great. And, across different demographic groups in a lot of different ways, people are made to feel like who they are is not good enough, is not acceptable. And as a society, we have a lot of work to do in changing the way that we behave, in the way that we interact, in the way that we respect other people, regardless of who they are, where they come from. And so it fills my cup up, because even though it's challenging work and there are a lot of, people who are resistant to change and don't see the value of this work, it fills my cup up because I know that it matters for a lot of people. And even if we make changes for individuals at a time, there's still positive impact.
So that's very interesting, Sybil. Can you say a bit more really about the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy? Because it sounds from what you're saying as if it was neither enabling nor did it safeguard people.
Yeah. So what not many people know, especially those that, live outside of the United States, is that it was actually a political compromise. And so prior to the implementation of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, it was a complete ban on gay, lesbian, and bisexual people from serving in the military. And then, different world events happening, in particular, a gay sailor, was murdered by a fellow sailor in Japan, I believe. And then that drove the Clinton administration to go, right, we've got to find a better way of protecting our service members. And so Don't Ask, Don't Tell was actually the compromise. They weren't going to completely allow open service, but they were going to say, so what that came into place was you can serve if you're gay, lesbian, bisexual, but just don't tell anyone about it and your career will be fine. No one can ask you about it, like directly ask you about it. You don't tell anyone about it. Off we go. And so it enabled gay, lesbian, and bisexual service members to serve, but having to withhold and really be careful about who you talk to and what kind of information that you disclose. And so while to some it was seen as a win, it's still discriminatory. It's still making people feel like they can't just be themselves and have that psychological safety in the work environment that everyone needs. And so to see that get repealed in 2012 was the real victory of just complete open service. Our trans brothers and sisters, were and non-binary friends were obviously that's a different conversation, and that was a different kind of a battle, in a way, political battle. But we're seeing, we have open service for the trans community now as well, though a little bit later than the LGB side of the house. So a lot of work to be done, and through the old ban and under Don't Ask, Don't Tell combined through military history. So up until 2012, more than 100,000 service members had been unfairly discharged simply because of who they are and who they love. So, when we talk about the impact of a policy, that's over 100,000 people losing their careers just because of who they are. And it's just so unnecessary. And I know the UK went through, something similar with, Section 28, I think is what it was called. I've been learning loads about that since living over here, and that's across, all working environment, not just the military. So there's a lot of people here in the UK who can relate to exactly what I've been through. And so, and I don't think any of us want anyone feeling anything like that.
I mean, it's shocking numbers just in terms of losing career, but I was also thinking about the role. When you were talking, I was struck by how shaming it is to have part of you that you have to keep secret. There's a very loud message there that there's something sordid about you, and that you should have to keep that secret.
Mm-hmm.
As a therapist, that is one of the challenges, is helping people shed themselves of shame, and yet actually to be employed in a place of work where you're having this loud shaming message. You can only really begin to imagine what that must have felt like.
It's heavy. And I think that's just the first word that comes to mind. It's just heavy. Because society already was doing a really good job of making people feel like it's not okay. Like I knew since I was a little kid, that I was, attracted to girls rather than boys and that sort of thing. And like, growing up feeling these things, but then, not seeing any sort of representation or TV show or anything that shows someone living a life that like I feel like I could be living. Society was already telling me that something's not right here, and this isn't how I'm supposed to feel and operate, and then you compile on that, or compound onto that religion or whatever it may be, all these different institutions in society saying, not quite right here. But then it's a totally different experience, I think, to have your career be at stake for it, and then it just adds an even more intense layer of fear and anxiety and, having to think through how I answer questions and who knows, who's seen a photo of me or, whatever it may be. Like it's heavy, it's hard, it's anxiety inducing. And there's just zero psychological safety. And I just can't like stress the importance of that. And like, I don't think I even recognized the importance of it until after the repeal. And I could just be myself and to just the stark difference of performance of, confidence I had in myself of, all the things. Like I was absolutely thriving in my career, after being able to just relax and be myself. And not only that, but like I could be a role model then because I was an officer and I'm a leader, and those types of things. So for young airmen that I was leading to see me being my full authentic self, like is so powerful. And I've, had teammates, say that like, wow, it's just great to see you be you and have the courage to do that following the repeal and stuff, and not just from people that I was leading, but it's a leading upward sort of thing. I had people who were more superior to me saying like, wow, it's so like important to see you, being yourself, and it really makes me reflect on how I lead, and that sort of a thing. So yeah, but I would say direct answer to your question is it's just really, really heavy and hard, and shame is a really difficult thing to work through and process and get past, because I carry triggers from that still, and we're, over a decade later, and I still have moments where I'm like, and then I'm like, okay, no, I'm safe, we're good, but yeah, it's not a great one, by any means.
So what was it about 2012, Sybil, that enabled Don't Ask, Don't Tell to be repealed? Was there just a change in culture? Or?
It was a change in government. That's when President Obama was in the White House, and boldly willing to take that move to not only repeal it but codify it into law, so it can never be put back in place. And that's what we saw happen to, the trans community is that it was repealed but not codified. So then President Trump came along and reinstated a trans ban after people had been told it's safe to be who you are, join the service. They did, and then, a ban is put back in place again. It just creates an even more intense, level of insecurity and harm. And so then when President Biden came in and then repealed it once again, that was the big ask, is like codify this into law. So we stop doing these back and forths, based on political whims, because it's so harmful and dangerous when that happens.
Yes, although I suppose Roe versus Wade, the example of Roe versus Wade indicates that nothing is truly safe.
Yeah, and well, yeah, exactly. But then I think so. There's like the President Obama being in the White House. There was also, in 2008 is when the Defense of Marriage Act was repealed in the United States. So there was a bit of a culture shift. To see that, it still unsettles me to think that it wasn't until 2008 that we have the right to get married. And then I think a lot of times when I talk about my experience, one of the immediate reactions is, holy cow, I didn't realize Don't Ask, Don't Tell was in effect for so long. Like, I think of that as like, such long ago history. And to think that it was, only 2012 that was repealed is like, wow, that's recent history. That's pretty mind-boggling.
So, Sybil, why did you join the military in the first place?
It was a few things. First and foremost, 9/11 happened when I was a sophomore in high school. I had never really thought about, any sort of military career as an option. My dad served in the U.S. Navy during Vietnam. And so to him, it was a good option. He tried encouraging me to think about it because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so he's like, it's a good way to find out, and if anything, you get a paycheck, you get to travel the world, like, think about it. And so I did, but it wasn't until really looking at universities and that sort of thing, I ended up picking a military school to go to university. And I could not, like, my family's all right. I wouldn't say we're from a really low socioeconomic background, but like I couldn't realistically afford university without help. And so the Air Force was great and offered me a scholarship my sophomore year. And said they'll pay for the rest of the way if I keep, performing the way that I was. And so, yeah, ended up committing to the Air Force because of the financial help through university.
And I guess when you joined up, you weren't really able to be aware of what a strain it was going to be.
I didn't. I got a little bit of a heads up because university was, my first exposure to it. I could have lost my scholarship if someone reported me. So, usually university is your time where you're like exploring yourself and figuring it out. And I couldn't do that because if people found out and decided to tell the Air Force, they would have pulled my scholarship and my commission, and I would have been out of a career, and a degree, and so it was quite stressful even in the university level, to just be myself. And it was terrifying if there was like rumor mill going, or, and I hear my name in it and it's like, oh my gosh, and then just waiting for that call or that letter, or, whatever, that someone's going to tell me that it's all over. So I kind of already had a heads up of what I was getting into, just being in the university environment. And it got me to the point where my senior year, before commissioning, I had, massive second guessing of, is this what I want to do? Like, oh my gosh, this has been absolutely miserable just being in university, being terrified of this. And now I'm setting myself up for a career in it. And so I had massive second guesses, and was, exploring options to, like, how do I repay the scholarship money that they gave me and not commission, and those types of things. I ended up, sticking with it and having my career. But even that was like, I was planning just to do my 4 years that I owed them and be done. Like, I can make it 4 years. I can do anything for 4 years. That's short term, drop in the bucket. Like, let's just get it done. But then obviously I ended up doing 12 because the repeal happened. So I got to experience life before and after the repeal, and I'm glad I stuck it out.
How much more difficult did it make it to do it's already a stressful job, isn't it, being in the military?
Mm-hmm.
How much more difficult did it make it? Did it heighten your sense of danger when you were in physically dangerous situations?
I think I don't know that it heightened my sense of danger. I think what it did, so I can answer this in different ways. So just from a pure starting my career perspective, I pride myself on learning and developing as a leader. That was something that was really appealing about the military anyway, is that regardless of what career path you end up in, what they're going to do is develop you as a leader. And so I'm very, very passionate about leadership and that continuous development. And to me, I greatly, greatly value, the importance of empathy and compassion and kindness as leadership imperatives, which was, not always the most common thought process in the military, but I think a lot of people are coming around to that and recognizing how important that is. But to not be able to be my own authentic self and be genuine as I want to be, I don't think anyone wants to go into the workplace and be discussing their personal life, their private life, but to be able to answer questions comfortably. If people are like, what are you doing for the weekend? Or, if you do have someone visiting, being able to just say who that is without going, oh, this is my really great friend, and like find those ways of being honest without, telling the complete truth, kind of thing. So like I was uncomfortable with that I couldn't just be my authentic self to then enable my airmen to be their authentic selves and just be comfortable and confident in exactly who they are, and thrive in the workplace. And then there was that piece of it that put me at odds with our values as an institution. Is integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. They're telling me integrity, always have integrity, but then I have to like navigate how to be honest with people without, and so like that's not a position we should ever put anyone in. But yeah, to the second part of that question, in terms of being in dangerous environments, it really hit home for me when I was deployed in 2010 in Afghanistan. I spent, 9 months there. And so to be in that sort of an environment, it really started getting to me more than it did just at my home station in the States, doing that sort of thing. Cause that's more in, community engagement, the fun stuff, showing people how cool the Air Force is and that sort of thing. But like in a combat environment, then I'm in this position where I'm like, wow, like I am here and expected to put my life on the line for a country that's telling me that it's not even okay to be who I am, and that really was kind of it sounds dramatic to say like existential crisis moment, but it was kind of like a, whoa, what am I doing? Like willing to give it all, but I can't even be all that I am, and then to think like, gosh, what if something does happen and I am killed in action? I will have never experienced what it feels like to just live openly as myself, and my partner is not allowed to be my next of kin. Like, thank God my parents had a good relationship with her. I think about all of my other, brothers and sisters in arms, and like they don't always have the best relationships with their immediate family. They have their chosen family, and their chosen family can't be their next of kin. And then it just like made me think through all of these things where I'm like, gosh, like we're so willing to be there for our country when our country is not willing to be there for us in the same way. And that's a really uncomfortable dynamic to have, like in a work environment and a friendship and a, romantic relationship. Like it needs to be mutual. And so I think that was where it really hit home for me that like, this isn't for me. I need to get out of this. And so I got home in the summer of 2011. And then 2011 is when President Obama announced it was going to be repealed. It just officially went into effect in 2012. And so, yeah, I held on a bit longer for that. But in that deployed environment, it's already stressful, anxiety inducing. And then to have all of those thoughts on top of it, it's like, I shouldn't have to be thinking about all of these things. But I did.
Doesn't sound melodramatic at all, actually, and I think what it shows is the total kind of like lack of empathy in devising policies like that fail to consider the human impact. I was also thinking, even from a security point of view, it doesn't make sense, because actually, if you're keeping a secret, then there is something that can be used to leverage as power against you. In the prison service, we used to say to officers, if you make a mistake, you need to own up to your mistake. You can't afford to have a prisoner knowing something about your mistake, because that's potentially blackmail material. And the higher you go in the forces, if you're having to keep a big secret like that about yourself, you're really creating opportunities that leave you quite vulnerable, aren't you? Not just you, but the whole force.
Yep.
So after you left, you worked for the Modern Military Association of the USA. What was the purpose of this organisation?
Yeah, so it was Modern Military Association of America, and that was set up as, it was actually a like convergence of a few nonprofits that came together, but the sole focus that the organization has been getting after is, one, advocacy, really fighting hard for the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, fighting really hard for the repeal of the trans LGBTQ plus service members and their families and veterans. But the core mission of the organization is, putting funding behind getting all of those dishonorable discharges overturned from service members who are discharged because of, under Don't Ask, Don't Tell and the prior, full ban on service. And why that's significant is because a dishonorable discharge basically screws over anyone's opportunity of employment out of the military. So they not only say you're not good enough as who you are to serve in the military, but we're going to make sure employers elsewhere outside of the military know that you're no good and you don't deserve employment as well. And so it's just long-term detrimental impact to these service members, and it's heartbreaking. And so telling their stories, we did a lot of sharing people's stories for the 10-year anniversary of the repeal a couple of years ago, and it's just like heart-wrenching, like to hear people gave everything. They loved serving, they felt that call to service and duty for their country, but they were kicked to the curb and then struggled to find employment. Some ended up homeless, all these things because there's no means of supporting themselves. And then we get into arenas of addiction and, whatever else, because, the country the country as a whole has basically turned their backs on them. And so our mission was, making sure we advocate for those rights, get these dishonorable discharges overturned, support people back into employment, those kinds of things. And just, general awareness of how messed up the policy really was. And the fact that we need to acknowledge that. And like you said, own the mistakes of the past as a country, and recognize, the work that we have to do to make things better. I think we're still reckoning with the past on civil rights movement and those kinds of things in the US. And I know, some of that's here in the UK as well. But I think, the more people are aware of those dark histories, I think the more we can make sure we don't repeat them.
Yeah, it's really moving to hear you talk about it, actually, Sybil. Just hear the sadness as you talk about, human beings' lives, aren't there? A lot of people who've been affected by that. Which brings us, I suppose, to the next question, which, since its inception in 1776, America's been at war for 225 of the 243 years of its existence. Do you have any thoughts about how that shapes American society, and in particular the impact on the working class? I mean, I'm struck by you talking about needing to join the forces in order to go to university.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think, gosh, a lot of things come to mind on this question. It's really big, and I think it's easier for me to answer now that I'm not in the service. But I think first and foremost, what comes from to mind is that it reinforces the sense of American arrogance. We see ourselves as the world police. It's on us to call out people's behaviors and make sure people are in line, and value democracy and all these other things. And and I experienced that firsthand. And in Afghanistan, trying to force democracy on a tribal culture. Why? It's like, kind of different things like that, where it makes you question, like, what are we getting after? We did a lot of really positive things. Like, I was on a provincial reconstruction team, and we were building schools and clinics, and, teaching women and girls how to raise chickens. And, and we got over 3 million Afghan girls into schools during the, 12 years that provincial reconstruction teams were happening. So there were some positives, but at the same time, forcing these Western ideals, in cultures that, is it necessary? I don't know. And so, but I think, yeah, it reinforces the fact that we've been at war for so long in so many different places, that sense of American arrogance, that it's on us to correct people's behaviors and keep everyone in line. But also, wars are expensive, and so when our country is investing so many millions and millions and trillions into overseas conflict, that money is not being invested within the country, and improving things. And so, yeah, then we have very, big gaps in income, and when there aren't a lot of options, yeah, I think the military ends up getting populated by, people who need that financial support, to get a leg up. And why is that the only option for socioeconomic support, in a career and a future? Like, there should be, money invested elsewhere to get, young people who need that, sort of equity into the education system, or make education more affordable in general, rather than it being, a capitalist market as well, like other things. Yeah, I think it's tough. It's such a huge question. There are a lot of reasons why that's problematic, that we've spent a good part of our history in conflict.
Well, it is. I think I read as well, it might even be every single senator, but it was certainly, like, almost every senator has got investments in munitions in America. And so, cynically, you have to think there's something in it for the political class to be at war with other countries, isn't there? Because they financially, they themselves personally benefit from that.
Yeah, and that's not something, that us as your average service member were ever, like, purview to. We're given our mission brief. This is what we're doing. This is why. And then we go, all right, off we go. Let's, because we believe in the work that we do. But I mean, that was an issue, a really big struggle. I was deployed for a second time. Election was happening, and I went, the next election was happening, and I went to bed with experts saying it was a 96% chance Hillary was going to win. So then I'm like, all right, we're good. And then I woke up the next morning and was like, what happened overnight? Like, what happened? And so again, that crisis point of, like, I'm wearing this uniform and I'm like, goodness, Donald Trump is now my commander in chief, and it puts me at odds with my values, because of, outward behaviors, statements that are made, open press, those kinds of things. And I go, gosh, like, that's the leader of the free world. Again, the American arrogance, that there's a lot of other free, world countries, but we call, we own that title too often. But yeah, there was another one of those, like, goodness, like, I don't know if I can continue serving and wearing this uniform with a leader that does not align with my values. And that's so important, because I think every employee in every organization will feel that in some way or another if the leader of their organization, that's an extreme example of the president of the United States and a service member, but, like, that's important in any organization. If the people that are charged with leading it and looking after your well-being are not role modeling and exemplifying, stellar behavior, positive values, then it makes people question whether or not they should be there and if this is a place they belong. And it's something I think for a lot of leaders to stew on.
Thank you. And how did your experience of being in the military shape your approach to how you perform your current role?
I think it shaped the fact that, because I hit on this a little bit at the beginning, like the more so than anything, regardless of career path, the military is charged with developing us as leaders. I was constantly getting faced with leadership development and courses and, all the things, and getting different personality assessments to determine what kind of leader I am and areas I need to work on, and that sort of thing. And so I think it's developed me into a very solid, confident, but most importantly, self-aware leader. And through my experiences, I've served with, for, a number of variety of leaders, and I've seen what great looks like, and I've seen what awful looks like, and I've decided which side of that house I would like to be on and stay in, and that sort of thing. And so I've definitely carried that through in this line of work, especially of trying to encourage other leaders. That's my passion thing to talk about. And any speaking engagement I'm invited to talk about, inclusive leadership is the one I zero in on, because it's the leaders that shape the cultures. It's the leaders who reinforce the cultures, hold people accountable when they aren't aligning with the desired, expected culture of the organization. So if they're not getting it right from the top, then who is, and so I think I bring it into the workplace every single day and try and encourage and inspire leaders to really recognize their role in this conversation. It's not people from marginalized backgrounds that are going to change society and organizational cultures. It's leadership. So I'll get on a soapbox for days on this, so I'll just I'll wrap it there. But yeah.
So, well, I'll take you back a bit, Sybil, because like Naomi, I was very affected really by your description of life in Afghanistan and the kinds of thought processes and realizations that you went through. It reminded me a bit of hearing some Vietnam War vets talking about similar things, particularly black vets who suddenly thought, what am I doing in this country fighting somebody I don't have any quarrel with when things aren't all good back home, and how problematic it is having these tranches, these groups of people in minority situations who are persecuted in different ways. And of course, it's a battle that never ends. It's a battle of attrition rather than a one-off.
Yeah.
Anyway,
absolutely.
Sorry.
No, I mean, that's a great point. I mean, that goes even back to and I think it's reflected there, and it's something I'm really proud to see, a lot of different movies coming out and television shows coming out, really celebrating, Tuskegee Airmen and in different groups. Yeah. Marginalized groups, dating all the way back to the world wars and stuff. If you have people from marginalized groups who are told they are less than human, they don't deserve what, the white population do, and yet they're still willing to join the fight, show that patriotism for the country that they come from and that sort of thing. And why did that not push and inspire more people to take pause and reflect on that sooner? Was it because their story wasn't told widely enough? And now we're getting exposed to those stories, and now it makes us reflect on those things. I don't know, but there's so many examples of people just wanting to show that I'm also human. I'm also deserving of these opportunities. I'm also deserving of the same recognition. And yeah, I already said opportunity, but just to be. And why do we have to prove that and work so hard to prove that? It's, yeah, I question that a lot. And I think that I stew on these kinds of things every day in this line of work, where I'm like, why is this such a battle? Why does it take speeches and training and all these other things to make people recognize that diversity, equity, and inclusion is simply about respect, recognizing that human beings are human beings, and we need to treat everyone with the same level of respect regardless. I don't understand why it takes such a big concerted effort and a tremendous budget and all these resources to help people see that and recognize that.
Just to be clear as well, that although we're obviously talking a lot about America because you're
yeah yeah
from,
yeah
clearly the British history is
Yep.
got as many issues, and just the history of the Gurkhas, for instance. But
Yeah.
obviously we have our own checkered history as well. We're just focused on America because that's where you as our guest are from.
No, that's a great point. And I think about that every time we do Black History Month. And I thought, the Bank of London did a great job with the Slavery in the Bank exhibit, in owning the fact that, like, the United Kingdom, when you look at Black History Month and stuff, how often do you pull the stories from the U.S.? So you talk about Martin Luther King and the U.S. Civil Rights Movement and slavery tied to places other than the U.K., but London, Bristol, Liverpool, some of the major cities in the UK were built on the backs of slavery, and yet that's not, always talked about. And so, yes, you're right. It's conversations that are very, very relevant here in the UK. And you look at current government and statements being made, and, yeah, it is very much a relevant conversation in both arenas, unfortunately. But yeah, I do speak more from an American perspective because that's, what I know more of.
Yeah, yes, you're quite right. We've got hundreds of years of history of teaching the natives how to do things properly, and also having wars all the time. So the USA isn't alone in having hundreds of years of non-stop war, because we've done it too.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, coming back to the point that Naomi was asking about earlier about diversity,
Yep.
What do you think is the impact of not having an obviously diverse board or senior management team?
I think at the very basic level, when you don't have that visible representation at the top, then there's not as much for people throughout the organization to aspire to. It looks like, you can actually see the glass ceiling in place. Like, okay, I can maybe develop in this organization, but I can clearly see that I'm not going to get there. I'm not going to get all the way to the top. And they don't come up with statements. Statements are made for a reason. And so when we say, if you see it, you can be it, a lot of people need to see that visual representation to know that there's opportunity for them. And so that's the very basic level of it. That's just representation. I think when you have that diverse leadership team, you get the diversity of lived experience, you get the diversity of perspective, background, education, all the things that makes for a more innovative, creative, deliberate leadership team that can actually think and represent, the views of everyone working in the organization, more so than a very homogenous group of very like-minded people, that's very susceptible to groupthink and therefore very susceptible to failure. And attrition rates will reflect how much an organization likes to see a homogenous leadership team. People will speak with their feet when that continues to be the trend.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, as you probably know, Naomi and I both worked in prisons, English prisons, quite a lot. And while we know it's not illegal to be a gay prison officer, you don't see many of them around, but you do see gay women staff.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts on how gay male staff could feel safer to be themselves?
Oh, that's really tough because it's almost, it's a challenge because the ultimate conversation here, right, is about the, I don't want to, like, I'm trying to be careful and think through the wording because it's not about masculinity, because there are plenty of gay men who are very masculine as well. And there are plenty of gay women who are really feminine. So it's not, don't know this necessarily about I think it's that, the confidence, the toughness. I get that they need that hardened exterior so that in that power competition between inmates and the guards, they know who's boss, sort of thing. I don't know. I'm not in that environment, so I can't speak to it, but I could imagine that's a dynamic there of needing to present in a certain way that enables you to feel like you have the authority and therefore feel safe. And so I think it's.
But maybe there's maybe the problem there
Yeah,
is,
that's a big question. I'm not sure how to answer. Yeah.
yeah, but I think I've kind of like replicated that problem there in terms of asking how they could feel safe to be themselves. But really, the issue is
Yeah,
about the
Exactly.
institution. Why isn't the institution
exactly. Yeah.
creating the kind of conditions where it's okay to be gay as well as male whilst working in a prison? Because
Yeah, exactly.
in over 20 years of working in prisons, I've only ever encountered 2 openly gay male officers, and
Hmm.
that's shocking, because I can't believe that there isn't representation amongst the population. So that's a lot of people going to work potentially
Hmm.
not feeling ashamed or not feeling able to be
Yeah.
themselves,
Yeah.
or
I wouldn't guess that shame is a part of it, to be honest. I think it's that safety piece, like, the feeling of threat in that relationship, that dynamic between inmates and guards. Like, does that make me susceptible to violence, and are you more susceptible to violence and those kinds of things, if this is found out about me? So I don't know it's necessarily being shame as much as fear. And I can recognize that, or at least empathize with that, of why that might be fear. But that's also based off of, generalized stereotype about inmates, and like, so it's kind of the, like, how are those behaviors managed stuff? Because, I could imagine there's, the majority of inmates are not, violent, and are not interested in creating a threat environment there just because a guard is being themselves. But, I if we're, a lot of times our behaviors are shaped by assumptions, which are driven by stereotypes, which are, but yeah, I would think fear more than shame would be at play there, but that's an assumption on my part.
no, but I think it is interesting because the unit that I worked in was a psychologically minded, supportive unit, and
Hmm.
actually often felt like the prisoners were actually quite comfortable with people having more fluid sexuality.
Mm.
Um, you know, that's not to say there was never any homophobia, but I don't think it was necessarily always driven by just homophobia. There were often other factors there. There was often an acceptance
Hmm.
of of people's sexual orientation without it being a massive issue.
Yeah.
So
I would love to know. I'm a data nerd and I love research, and I think it would be really interesting, a line of research to understand if the value of representation amongst prison guards is important and of value to inmates. To know that there are guards, with a variety of experiences and backgrounds or whatever, so there's at least someone they feel like they can relate to, and therefore create psychological safety for the inmates, seeing themselves represented in that population, and it's not just a particular class or demographic group in that us versus them dynamic. I would imagine there's value in that sort of representation, just like any other representation.
very much so. And again, the issue about security comes back to play. That actually, if you're living with a secret,
Mm,
there's potential to blackmail you.
yeah.
Sybil, just thinking about your current role, what are the emotional challenges of performing a role that's contingent on your difference? Do you ever feel like you lack privacy? Does it become tiring have to have your sexuality placed so prominently in the foreground?
Yeah, it isn't it. It isn't. It isn't. Like, I think because I understand the value of that representation, I've made myself, a lot more comfortable talking about it. There are things that that are more new for me, that I'm not as comfortable, being that representation for. And so I think that's where it's important to have those boundaries for ourselves as practitioners. Like, I'm very comfortable with and accustomed to my sexual orientation being outwardly presented and something that I talk about openly, and I'm okay with that. But there are other sides of things, like neurodivergence is a rather new one for me, and I do talk about it, but I don't feel as comfortable because I'm still learning a lot about myself and how that plays out for myself. And so talking about it like I'm an expert is not something I'm necessarily comfortable with, but I can talk about it from a personal experience sort of thing. And we just had we established a mental health network within our organization, and it's not one to talk about like well-being and stress at work. It's one to talk about actual mental health disorders, and so PTSD is very uncomfortable to talk about, and that's not one that I put out there, and it's not one that and so that's my boundary for myself. I'm saying it in this environment because I can go up to that boundary and say, yes, this is a real thing for me, but it's not something that I include in my speaking engagements or when I'm rattling off my, I'm Sybil, head of DEI, I'm a lesbian, I'm a veteran, I'm a this, I don't include that in there because that's a boundary point for me. So I think that's what's really important for any EDI practitioner, is to recognize where those boundaries are to keep ourselves safe while also being relatable to people and helping them, have those role models and people that they can see representing them, in open forums. But yeah, it does take its toll sometimes, having to like say all those things, because I shouldn't have to, I should be able to just say, hey, I'm Sybil and this is what I do, and not validate why I have, the experience to work in this space through my personal life, but that's where we are. But yeah, I think those boundaries are necessary, though.
Thank you. And finally, how do you? I mean, you mentioned boundaries in terms of looking after your well-being. Anything else that you do to keep yourself feeling emotionally safe and nourished? Any advice for our listeners?
I think it's recognizing that we can't be everything for everyone everywhere all at once. And that was my challenge in my first year in this role, was trying to boil the ocean and just solve as many things as I possibly could as quickly as I possibly could. And it's just not possible, and it leads to burnout. And so I think just learning how to prioritize effectively and recognize that it's okay to say, I'm going to get this done, but not right now. Like, I will get there. It's important to me. I value it, but I've got to get this, and this done first, and then I'll get here, sort of thing, rather than feeling this pressure to say yes to everyone and everything. It's really the value of that prioritization and recognizing that you don't necessarily have to say no, but you can say yes if, you're willing to wait, or if I can just get to this then, or under these conditions, sort of thing. Like, you can still find ways to yes that work within a reasonable, work within reasonable parameters where we're not leading ourselves to burnout trying to do all the things. But yeah, that's been my biggest lesson in taking this role is learning how to prioritize effectively and manage expectations, and protect myself in the process.
Thank you, Sybil. Really enjoyed having this conversation with you.
Yeah.
You being so candid. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's challenging questions, and I think I rambled my way through quite a few of them. It was interesting when you asked me about the podcast, though, and it made me go back to I immediately was like transported back to that first deployment in Afghanistan, and I had a journalist, a freelance journalist, was embedded with us and living on our forward operating base with us in Gardez. And we were talking about, because I led a female engagement team, we got out to talk to Afghan women about their experiences and those sorts of things. And she was asking me about that, and I was talking about how, a lot of times they're confined to their culottes and their lives are so restricted, and that it's almost like living in prison. And then I had made a comment about how I can relate to that, because being deployed and on that base, and we weren't allowed to leave, and we were very restricted in our movements and what we could do and whatever. And my commander was not very happy when that was like published in the article that was relating being in a military deployed environment to being in prison. But it was an honest statement, and I think a lot of people related to that. But that was immediately what I thought about when you asked me to do this podcast, where I was like, there are definitely correlations to experience. But yeah.
Thank you. That's a terrific ending comment there, Sybil. It's been a real pleasure talking with you, and I think we too enjoy these challenging conversations.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me.